Thank you for coming to what is undoubtedly the most exciting event in Westminster today. I've heard there's something going on over the road, but no consequence really. So we're going to talk about the exciting, fast-moving world of open banking, new payment architecture, and the interestingly, well, all the acronyms around that: confirmation of payee, request to pay, and we have a panel of esteemed experts next to me. So without further ado, let me let each of them sort of spend a couple of minutes introducing themselves and a bit of background, and then we'll get straight into it.
Hello. Hello everyone. I'm Danny Doyle. I work in product management for Access Pay. My job, I guess, is to make sure that the software and solutions we build is fit for purpose and will continue to meet the needs of corporates for the foreseeable. I'm guessing I've now got the 6-year-old picture on behind me, and I'm sorry to disappoint that I don't look like that anymore. The reason Access Pay put this, or came up with the idea of hosting this event is there's a lot going on in the world of payments at the moment. There's a lot of misinformation out there, there's a lot of concerned corporates, there's a lot of people saying, what am I going to have to do? Are my 10-year-old systems going to cope with this? Is it going to cost me a lot of money? So to just give a bit of a better summary of what is actually going on, hopefully educate some of you, hopefully reassure some of you that might be concerned, and answer any questions that you have.
So I'm Jonathan Williams. I'm an independent consultant. I look into issues around compliance with regulation, opportunities to use technology, fighting financial crime, and generally the sort of services we use to prove who we are, to actually prevent fraud. And in fact, I spent the last 2 days chairing a conference on fraud, the 13th annual fraud conference across in near Tower Bridge. And so apologies if I seem a bit glass half empty. But we certainly need to look at all of the changes we're making sure that we're protecting them appropriately, as I know we will end up doing. It's just trying to spot the things which might go wrong. I think there's a lot which is happening, which is very exciting. I think there are a lot of opportunities, and let's hope we can capitalise on those and actually build the sort of future for payments that we really want.
Okay, and finally, thoroughly regretting his LinkedIn picture, which is the one that's sitting behind him. I'm Darren Wright, service line manager for bulk payments, part of Pay.UK, which is the new home, which hopefully you're all aware of, but if not, you're finding out now for BACS, faster payments, and the check and credit clearing services in the UK. The aim of Pay.UK is looking to be the leading retail payments authority that will create best-in-class solutions in the world. But certainly serve the UK market. A few facts and figures, because we're about to throw these in because it sounds quite good. So last year, our systems processed 8 billion payments worth approximately £6 trillion. That's BACS and faster payments, and there were, despite this of its demise, 441 million cheques, totaling just over £500 million going through. What we're looking to do is obviously use these events to get the word out about the fact that Pay.UK is here. And also to understand the questions that our users, both current and potential, actually have got around about the way that the UK retail infrastructure will actually develop.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. And I think to get started, we talk about open banking, PSD2. I think it'd be good to sort of set the scene maybe by talking about what exactly is that. So Danny, maybe if you could kick us off there and just talk about, what is it, and certainly how is it being perceived by corporates?
Thank you. Quite the big ask, thank you. Anyone who doesn't know, we looked at the attendee list actually. I think there's a lot, we've got a couple of corporates, we've got a lot of financial services people in here, so I'm probably expecting more than normal to have heard of open banking or the Second Payment Services Directive. Is there anyone who's not heard of it? Very good. Okay, so I will start by talking about what's happened. So, some legal stuff was enshrined in law that said that banks had to essentially open up the data that they held for retail customers, so you and I, and then corporate customers, so businesses of all types. A lot of the banks, I think, initially saw this maybe as a threat to their business model. Some banks really embraced it. And then this thing happened about January last year, maybe, that kind of saw these services go live. And it's been a success of sorts, I think. I think a lot of business consumers have, or a lot of business users haven't really been able to take advantage of any of the changes that they were forced to do. I think largely the impact has been on retail users. So if you look at some of the big banks, so your Barclays, your HSBC, your NatWest, a lot of them have now launched these nifty little apps that will allow you to see balances from other banks in one app. It's quite cool as a retail user. Corporates, certainly the ones who wanted to, have been able to do that for quite a long time. Now those apps will be expanded or enhanced, that will allow people to make payments from multiple banks in one app, and that's really cool. I think that's largely a response to some of your Monzos, your Starlings, some of these that we term the challenger banks, that have been able to come in with a 21st century infrastructure and just build a new thing overnight like that, and the banks have been kind of responding to it. Our view is that corporate adoption has been slow because there's kind of a watershed moment coming in September, which Jonathan is much better qualified than I to speak about, that will mean some of these services will start to be rolled out to corporates, though we've not seen much of it yet. I think either way, corporates are always going to be a bit slower than retail consumers, especially the millennial generation, and anyone's happy to just try a new app because it looks fun. But in terms of what's happening in September, John, do you want to take that so I don't embarrass myself?
Okay, so open banking has been in existence in the UK, has been live since January last year, and effectively, let me just go dig into a little bit of the detail behind that. There are two flavours of open banking. There's open banking as mandated by the Competition and Markets Authority, you're probably all aware of. The CMA 9 banks in the UK are obliged to go and do that, and primarily focused on consumers and SMEs. European open banking, which is under Payment Service Directive 2 as well, obliges banks to open up all accounts. So that's corporate accounts, consumers, SMEs, government, charities, whoever. And the challenge is that to be able to open up access to those accounts, banks have to provide APIs. Now those APIs then need to be consumed by some providers and then services provided to you as businesses. The challenge is that the organisations that need to go and do that piece of development work to use those bank APIs to go and give you data which is useful or to enable you to make payments, that work hasn't happened. So one of the key deadlines for making this happen in Europe is the 14th of September this year. 14th of September is the deadline for imposition of strong customer authentication. I'm guessing, since you're familiar with Payment Service Directive 2, you've probably read the regulatory technical standard and all of the questions related to the online rulebook that the EBA has. I'm sure you know all the answers to those questions. But let me just recap a little bit. So strong customer authentication is multi-factor. You're required to do 2 factors out of 3 of something you know, something you have, something you are. What's termed under the regulation, knowledge, possession, or inheritance. Possession might be, say, a security token, and inheritance is something like a biometric. So at that point, you then have secure locks on those APIs. So theoretically, only the real user of that account, real owner of that account, can access it. And for a corporate world, that's your members of staff being able to strongly authenticate they are your members of staff and have real access to those accounts. That's the thing which is the balancing effect for opening up banking. You need to have the appropriate level of padlock and shackles to actually be able to open up access to the vaults of your banking data. And that's fundamentally why strong customer authentication is important for September the 14th. That's the deadline. We shall see how well banks manage to comply by that point. But there are certainly organisations, perhaps in the cards world, who may be lagging a little bit behind on that development. But we shall see where we are in September.
Perfect. And actually, what we're going to try and do is sort of open up for questions as we go along, as it were. So, as we're discussing each topic, if you have a question or feel like you want to ask something, just put your hand up and we'll sort of come to you. Actually, it'd be interesting to understand just your, I suppose, the panel's views generally on how open banking, PSD2 might impact kind of, retailers and merchants who are taking payments from consumers. So just be interested in your views on that and just how you think that might develop.
Okay, so I think open banking is a great opportunity. I think the fact that there's a third party there that can initiate payments from your bank to some other party on your behalf, taking your mandate to go and do that, and maybe provide you with a much more slick interface, so you can do, for example, retail payments. So when you're in the supermarket, maybe the supermarket is one of these third parties that sits between you and the bank that is allowed to make payments on your behalf. Maybe the supermarket can actually make those payments for you. Maybe they can do all sorts of other things around your account, help you with budgeting. And so there are potentially lots of opportunities. Where that may well be helpful for retailers is currently all those payments which are relying on the cards rails. So debit card payments, credit card payments, prepaid card payments, for example. Those attract quite large interchange fees or merchant service fees. And therefore merchants, retailers don't get as much of the money in the end as they otherwise would do. Perhaps with the interbank payment, and of course we as consumers in the UK don't pay for our faster payments, then the retailers will be able to go and make those payments, receive that money from their customers more cheaply, but secondly, they'll receive it almost instantaneously, because even in the cards world, you first do the clearing of the payment, and then the settlement, and then the funding of the merchant, the retailer, happens later. So firstly, the merchant's getting the retailer's getting the money earlier, and they're getting more money. So that may be a really good business proposition, certainly for a large retailer like a supermarket, but even smaller retailers might want to join some sort of scheme operated by a third party. So that may be a real benefit, and we could be using mobile-based apps to go and make payments like that.
From a Payment UK point of view, I mean, we are working closely. In fact, we're in the same building. There's elements of open banking, so we're closely involved, and we will touch on another couple of developments we have on request and confirmation pay, which have actually already been referenced, are looking to leverage some of the infrastructure and the opportunities of open banking. Certainly from our point of view, we wouldn't say that we have a drive over adoption, but we can certainly see a lot of benefits in terms of our role, which is to enable UK payments. The slightly selfish bit is anything that drives volumes away from cards is going to be a benefit to us. And certainly in terms of that, that's also helping just drive down the cost of undertaking retail payments in the UK. That's the key driver there, is to use that to enable. As I said, as well as request to pay and confirmation pay as we go through, there are other options where the open banking principles and strong customer authentication will actually enable innovation development in the market, which we would then be looking to support and ensure can sort of like run through the rails we're developing, and again just help corporates and retail in terms of managing their payments more effectively, more efficiently, and hopefully more cheaply.
Actually, Darren, you mentioned a couple of two key topics there. So confirmation of pay and request to pay. So it'd be really interesting to pick up on so for confirmation of payee, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, let's talk about what that is, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yes, certainly. Confirmation of pay, if you've not heard about it, almost does what it says on the tin, but effectively it's adapting using the open banking standards to allow pay. I'll get my terminology right. I work a lot with direct debit, so apologies. All my terminology is normally flip around in my head. But it enables the payer to confirm that actually the details of the account they're sending any money to is correct. I think if we're here and we're looking to dispel myths, one of the myths is that all payment transactions, the sort code, the account number and the account name that you provide are actually checked by the receiving bank to make sure that it's going into the correct account. I can already see the shakes of the audience, but that isn't the case. The account name is the missing part. Confirmation pay in terms of how it's currently being deployed, which is for retail customers, so the likes of you and me, is whenever we're setting up a new beneficiary, when you put in, I want to set up a payment to Danny, sort code, account number, name Danny, open banking will enable actually your payment provider, be that a third party provider that you're using, or your main PSP, to take a call out to the recipient's PSP and go, we have this information, it's this sort code, this account number, name Danny, is that correct? A response will then be provided, which will say, yep, that's effectively an exact match, so therefore, yeah, based on everything else you know, that's okay to go. It's not a match. Effectively, GDPR always looms its head large over all these things. We won't tell you what the actual account name is, but we will tell you it's not Danny and it doesn't look like Danny. You then, as a payer, you've got the option, do I still continue on that, or do I actually want to give Danny a quick call and go, yeah, it's not quite matching up with the details I've got, and then potentially find out they're not his details. The third option is it will come back with a close match. And on that, and I think this is something that is still being worked through in terms of how the response will come back, you may get some details of what the account name actually is to enable you to make a decision. My memory of names is terrible, if you've got a Danny surname, but effectively it could be Danny D, and you'll go, well, actually that's close enough. So that's where it comes in, and that's where it actually fits in with open banking. And the desire there is to users provide more surety to the payer and to address the concerns and the issues that authorised push payment fraud actually cause across the UK.
And from a sort of security, I mean, you mentioned you were at a fraud conference, Jonathan. This sounds like well, it could be used in the wrong way. So actually, is this something that you've seen a lot of debate and talk about how to secure it?
So certainly, I think we all agree that there's a need to have some sort of solution to the problem, because authorised push payment fraud, and some of the industry statistics suggest that in the first half of last year, that was about, I think it was somewhere in the region of 150 million loss in the first half of the year. The statistics I've seen actually suggest that's quite a low underestimate, and if you include business-based authorised push payment fraud, by which we mean persuading somebody to make a payment to an account in the control of a financial criminal, that you expect you're trying to pay your builder and it's actually a criminal instead. Somebody's persuaded you to do that. They've persuaded you to pay the wrong account. And we were talking earlier on before the panel about some of the history. Condé Nast was one of the first businesses I know which was hit for a large amount of money. That was $8 million, and that was in 2011. But evidence we've suggested thinks that if you add in the business-to-business authorised push payment fraud, then that totals up to somewhere in the region of between 1.2 and 1.4 billion pounds lost every year. And those figures are from 2017. And those figures are in the Emerging Payments Association's Facing Up to Financial Crime report. So it's a large amount of money, and we need something to go and tackle it. And I completely agree, having a match, no match, that's great. Having the close match, I'm slightly concerned that we might end up disclosing information, and fraudsters might be able to use that and game the system to be able to get other details, which they might not use to make a payment or a direct debit collection, but they might use to make an application fraud, or for other reasons. They might manage to phone up that particular account holder and use the information they've got to then go and take over the account. So I'm concerned, I'm always concerned when we're disclosing information, but I think there must be some ways of doing that. And I think one of the areas that confirmation of pay would be even better is if we could confirm other pieces of information about the account holder, like for example their address, maybe other pieces of information like their date of birth, so the things that we use for customer due diligence. And partially the reason for that is it's selfish. My name is Jonathan Williams, so I suspect that if somebody wanted to say, oh yeah, you need to pay J. Williams, I suspect there are a lot of J. Williams accounts there that could receive that money, pretending to be me, and I don't want that. So I'm just very keen that we're in a position to actually get control over that. But we absolutely completely agree the need for a confirmation of pay-like service. We just need to make sure that that service is as good as we can make it.
And just to that point, Jonathan, so there might be a number of J. Williams. Where does if you like the liability lie, or does it shift in this model? I mean, does it shift to the payee from the bank? How does that work? How do we currently think it's going to work?
So that's a very timely question. There's recently been proposed the contingent liability model, contingent reimbursement model, which I think goes live on the 25th of May this year. And that assesses how the payment service user, the customer, and the payment service provider have acted. And if they've met their level of care, not duty of care, but level of care is what it says in the model. And if the customer hasn't done enough checking, if they've just made a payment, they've accepted those details without even thinking about it, and made that payment, then maybe they haven't lived up to their level of care and therefore don't qualify for a reimbursement. But if they've done what they can to check that information is right, or maybe the payment service provider hasn't flagged up something that they might otherwise have done, then maybe it's the payment service provider that's at fault. And the model tries to work out who might be liable for refunding that particular transaction, and which payment service provider, whether it's the payer or the payee's payment service provider, and that tries to clarify that. But this is, of course, in addition to the banking protocol, which was introduced in 2016, went live in 2017, and prevented about £38 million worth of fraud last year by training bank staff to know what to do to try and spot these things and try and help their customers not to make these authorised push payment frauds. Obviously, £38 million is a lot of money, not a huge amount of money in comparison with the current estimates of authorised push payment fraud all the way across the industry, including business. So we're getting there, we're doing the right things, but we need to keep doing it.
Darren, Danny, any views on that topic?
I think that, so before I got into payments, I thought it was absolutely crazy that I could send somebody I know some money with the account name of Scooby-Doo. So I tested it and it worked. I just thought it was absolutely mental that we weren't doing stuff like this. I think it's probably going to be part of a wider push of, I guess, educating the people that are making payments, both payment service providers and consumers like ourselves and businesses. I think, was it level of care was the term that we use. I think it's difficult to strike a balance because it's very easy to just go, oh, the bank should check. But actually, as we've just heard, that's a very, very, very difficult problem to solve. As part of that wider, I guess, push or education of the people who are making payments, I think using services like confirmation of pay will start to train consumers to just think again. And we talked about cards. I know you weren't exactly sounding the death knell for card payments. But I can actually see a world in a couple of years' time where, the reason the move to cards was successful to a degree, somebody was telling me earlier, was because card payments were seen as more secure as cash, carrying cash or using cash. I can absolutely see a world where I might go on, buy my big shop from Asda, and prefer to use an app to authenticate that payment because I'm holding it here, it's got my thumbprint, and I know that whatever fraudster has got my card other side of the world is not going to be able to replicate that I am who I am and I've got what I know. So I think, yes, it's going to be tricky, yes, there's going to be extra friction involved in the payment journey for e-commerce, for other types of payments, certainly online where the card's not present. But I think it's just part of a wider industry push towards educating each other, bettering how to protect yourself from payments.
So your example, Scooby-Doo, I like that. That's a really good example. But I guess the challenge is the unintended consequences. So my understanding is back in mid-noughties, so about 2006, 2007, a bank decided to look at the incoming names, and those names which didn't match the names of the account holder or account holders, they would reject. And they got lots of complaints from a large government department that makes lots of credit transfers, lots of direct credits. And the problem was that they were delivering payments to these individuals, and they might have been payments for benefits or those sorts of things. But it was for either the partner who didn't have a similar name, or for children, or for other people who were receiving payments through that account. And the large government department said, this is awful. We're getting lots of rejected payments. We didn't used to. What's changed? And so I think there's a challenge that there may be some unintended consequences for some payers when they actually get these no matches back when they're expecting a direct match. I think we need to think about some of those kind of cases.
Is there any expectation that you can have more than one person then named on the account? So, or is it going to be a single name or a joint account? Obviously, you can have two names.
Yeah, I think on that it's, and again, a lot is concerned in terms of the rails at the payee's PSP, in terms of actually what is their account called? Is it in joint names? Is it in single names? What are the names on it? Because it's only going to be able to return the information that's on the account. But certainly the expectation is that we've got to work on this to evolve it to take into account those circumstances that we can do. And again, the option here is that even a no match doesn't mean that as the payer you're not going to be able to make a payment, but it does give you that warning that says actually you might want to just get back in contact with who you think you're paying to check the details and just understand if that is still the correct account to make the payment into.
Actually, it's a very good point. You were talking about rejected payments. We need to actually increase the accuracy of information, and yet it's, the experience, as you said from HMRC, is that many payments are paid with wildly inaccurate information. We're talking about confirmation of pay. The problem we've got, even as a corporate entity, is we have the legal name, we have the trading name, we have abbreviation. How do we, what sort of list, what degree did we go to actually make sure that we can have a match? And even then, for some bizarre reason, we actually have customers who pay in favour of Societe Generale, because that's where the bank is. I mean, who pays to HSBC or Barclays or when you're paying someone else? So customer education is a big issue, but what can we do about that? That's probably a big thing. What is going on with people in their mentality, and how do we manage that behaviour?
That's a very good question. I'd be ready to be up here answering it. But no, on that side of it, you're absolutely right that, customer education, certainly with phase one of confirmation pay, which is aimed at the retail market, is going to be a big thing.
But those consumers are paying business customers.
Yeah, and I think this is where the education piece has certainly been played in the UK. What we're looking to do is engage with the banks to help their customers who are going to be in the main. And I do appreciate there are third-party providers out there who may be initiating payments, but to start to undertake education there through their channels, their engagement with their customers, to actually really spell out what confirmation of pay is, what it means, why it's incredibly important, that effectively if you are making a payment to British Gas, that effectively you're not just putting in my gas provider, it's going to have to be applicable to the business you're paying. And conversely, I suppose there is almost an education piece to a degree for corporates, and I apologise now if I offend anyone, but it's actually making it absolutely clear the name in which you have to be paid for the account in which you're using for that purpose. And I do appreciate there are sort of like trading names, there's different ways that could actually represent from legal and actual names, but it's going to be having that bit to make it very clear to the payers, this is what you need to quote, to ensure that when you are setting up that beneficiary for the first time, so this is not, again, I don't know if we make clear every single time, this is just on the initial setup. So once you've got a beneficiary and you've confirmed them and they're trusted, you're not going to have to go through this every single time. It's only going to be where there's a change in details, but once you've got it right, you can be assured that you're actually making the payment through to the right area. If there are any issues, and I think again, education piece for organisations to support their customers, to just advise them actually what name have you quoted, our company name is this, to go through that. But yeah, education is going to be key, and as has been referenced, it's potentially a bit of a culture shock and a change to UK payments, because there hasn't been this emphasis on the account name and the importance of it before.
And it's interesting, I mean, where does request to pay fit into all this? Because obviously, so this kind of the two things sort of bleed together. So maybe, Jonathan, I don't know if you want to maybe lead off on that and how you see the two things fitting together.
So request to pay is another thing which came from the Payment Systems Regulators Payment Strategy Forum in the inclusion group. They were looking at how individuals might be able to control when they actually pay bills that they were due. Obviously direct debit is a fantastic proposition for people who generally have large amounts of money in their account, at least enough to cover the direct debits. Direct debit is a fantastic product, but it doesn't meet the needs of every payment user. Those people who are living not on the breadline, but who are living day to day, managing their money down to the sort of £5 or £10, they may not be in a position to pay today. They may be able to pay tomorrow because they're getting paid cash by some of their employers. And therefore, giving them a little bit more control, actually saying, I can't pay you today, I'll pay you tomorrow, or having that discussion with the payee might be a much better thing to do. And request to pay is a way of actually trying to facilitate that discussion. It's not really a replacement for direct debit, which we all rely on without having to think about it. I mean, I can't think of anyone who would move their mortgage to a request to pay because they only need to move it for a day because they haven't got paid. Well, maybe there are people like that. But what we're looking at is those people who want to move things or part pay requests. So a biller will send a request to pay message to the payer. They'll say, look, can you pay £25? The payer will say, that's great, I'll pay £25 now, that's fine, and that will go straight through. And of course, the request to pay has all the reference information. So one of the deficiencies at the moment is if you're paying via online banking, you might forget to type the reference number in, you might mistype it, which of course means that your payment might end up in a suspense account. But that's a data hygiene issue. Let's assume that this individual can't pay. So they say, okay, well I can't pay today, but I can pay in 2 days' time. That message will go back to the biller and say, look, I can't pay in 2 days' time, and in 2 days' time the individual can then make that payment with the appropriate reference data as well. In some cases that discussion may be a little bit more complicated, and you might actually need to go into not quite a collections process, but you might need to have a discussion with that individual. And request pay does facilitate some of those decisions. Now, my view is request pay is great, potentially, but it's probably not for the mass volume of payments. It's probably for a comparatively small number of maybe consumer payments. It may well have an application for business payments as well. But actually, to be honest, for most things that we do as consumers, for our regular bills, our household bills, our energy bills, direct debit works very, very well. And for business people, actually using banks direct credit or faster payments, it's a great product. Why would we not stick with that?
Sure. Just on RTP, it's e-invoicing. It is a business-to-business payments problem in my experience. So the ability to have a one-off payments with an invoice and automatically get it back with reconciliation is a non-trivial business-to-business payments benefit, in addition to the financial inclusion point you make. Is there any intent in the industry that you guys can see to use it?
The primary focus in the short term, as I understand it, is the financial inclusion benefit.
Because of the PSR remedies issue.
Because of the PSR remedies issue, absolutely right. But in the longer term, perhaps that electronic invoicing might be the step we need to go and take to go and move to wholesale to electronic invoicing in the UK, like Finvoice in Finland.
It's abolish checks.
Don't be controversial. Thank you, Simon. Darren?
Yeah, I would actually fully agree. I mean, it is part of the mandate deliverables that Pay.UK has out of the Payment Strategy Forum. And effectively, yeah, it does provide a benefit. Again, my background is in direct debit, so I wholeheartedly agree it's a wonderful way to pay and to collect. But on that, it's not suitable for everybody. There are issues with financial inclusion. There are issues with people that actually direct debit could work for, but they don't like the perceived lack of control. They still like to press the button that sends the payment through. And request to pay facilitates that. And it also addresses issues with regards to, as has been mentioned, irregular payments, even potentially, as you say, where finances are fairly tight and emergency crops up, and being able to use this to actually communicate through a secure and reliable method and confidential going through, because it's not an email, it can't be easily intercepted, or use a appropriate security standard, say, I have got issues here, can I pay £15 now, and can I enter a discussion as to how I can actually manage the rest of my debt, I think is going to be a huge benefit. Certainly can fully understand the agreement with corporate, certainly business to business invoicing, especially where they're potentially irregular, where direct debit may not be quite so suitable, and again with all the benefit in terms of the enhanced data that can be provided with the request to pay. So you've got details of the invoicing, detailed breakdown of what you're charging and why, all the sort of information that you would normally look to provide can be included. And again, the key thing at the end, there's a payment that can be generated off the back of it that contains all the reference information. And it's got absolutely clear clarity and can potentially even be used to offer sort of like a discounts for early payment, etc. All in one nice, easy to use mechanism.
So on the financial inclusion side, could we see people like Ofgem, Ofwat, mandating use of request to pay in the future as opposed to preloading keys and stuff maybe as an alternative? Would that be possible?
I think it's quite possible that once request to pay is out there and it's proven to work, that a number of regulators, regulated sectors might say you need to be offering request to pay as a potential means of payment. And you might decide to go and remove some of the other ones you're accepting at the moment if you're in that business, but actually request to pay, if it works well and it's proven to go and deliver the benefits for financial inclusion, I can see no reason why a regulator wouldn't encourage that.
Apologies, can I ask a question about ubiquity? Because at the end of the day, everybody hasn't got it, it's no use. So is everyone going to have it, and when?
Depends on regulators.
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, because otherwise you've got half an answer, you've got to keep going with everything. I mean, that's the problem. You get that.
Absolutely. So we've been working a lot with Pay UK on making this a proposition that people want to adopt. And you're absolutely right. If Barclays have got it and HSBC haven't, what good is that to everyone? Someone violently disagreed with me earlier, but I like to use the example of contactless card tricks, which took nearly a decade to get any kind of mainstream adoption. Again, as with confirmation of pay, it's not an easy nut to crack, but they've been told they've got to do it, so good luck. So the B2B thing, I completely agree. I don't think it's a day one thing. I think for the utilities, it's an absolute no-brainer. Again, it's going to take time, it's going to be expensive, probably, for any of them that want to do a lot of this in-house. And as the point you made, direct debit works absolutely fine for me, actually. I don't want to think about my gas bill, I've got to pay it anyway, right? But there are people with those meters in the house that hate the fact that they have to walk down to the corner shop and pay £5. The utility only gets £4 of it anyway because they're paying pay points some money and they're paying the card rail some money. So I think there's some no-brainers. We talked about charities earlier where people just cancel a direct debit because they're not as emotional about that cause anymore 13 months later. We've found some really interesting use cases that we've Access Pay, we've assumed a lot of them. Two stick out of late. So one was a big sort of currency trading house. They weren't kind of a TransferWise kind of size. They couldn't afford the massive banking relationships that they have. But they still relied on people sticking a card in and buying some currency for a service. And in a low margin business, that's super expensive. So they said, somebody can go through a web browser or in an app and a little alert will pop up saying, your rate is €1 per $2 or whatever, stick your thumbprint on here and buy it. And they said, and I won't have to pay the card fees for them sending me that money. I said, yes. And they said, so we know the reference, the rate, the bank it came from, and we've got proof of what's happened. And we said, absolutely, that's kind of the day one use case. The best one, though, was a lady at a university. Big university. They had something like 10,000 students from the Far East that came over, massive money spinner for them. And what we hadn't realised was that these people, when they get here on day one, cannot use I'm not bragging, but my Halifax current account is one of the dark blue ones and not the light blue ones. It's just a normal bank account. These international students get here and they've got these crappy cards that aren't even embossed. You can't even use direct debits on them. And they said, so we can connect to those 10,000 students for their gym, for loading up their meal cards, for paying their house fees. I said, yeah. She said, we'd buy that tomorrow if it existed. So I think the niche use cases, I'll go back to my big shop from Asda as well. I don't buy that on the same time every week, but they're a trusted beneficiary. I buy it roughly once a week. But if my consumer behaviour changes to the extent where I see re-authenticating a payment on my phone app as more secure as sticking my card details into a browser, then I think I'm going to use that. And if they give me £5 off the first time, then I'm going to go for it. That'd be my point on ubiquity.
Yeah, ubiquitous for you.
Yeah, it's not a character.
Yeah. Job done, mate. Yeah.
So once we've sorted down these issues, we'll move on to everyone
I've
else.
got a dark blue, I'm brown, I'm golden.
Yeah. FX analysis.
Yeah, I fully agree. Ubiquity is the thing. It is a good idea. It is addressing a need, and yeah, we can see a need. It's got to be adopted. I'm not totally close to the Request to Pay team. I work with them, but I'm not a talent of it. But they have got the website up. They've got the sandbox up, and I think they've got well over 100 organisations that have expressed an interest, and they've gone in and played and developed their apps and their API interfaces in there. So it does seem as though there's a lot of organisations out there that are potentially developing business cases that will enable people to engage with this. It may well be, and again, I genuinely don't know the names, would be, I suppose, a tad surprising if some of the larger players, again, we mentioned the Barclays and NatWest, the HSBCs not looking as a way of this is actually offering value to their customers. It's a way of actually getting secure stuff through. And potentially that sort of development with any third-party provider or direct provider that can then actually enable you to initiate a faster payment or other payment types are available off of your bank account with a simple, secure thumbprint, etc. And that gives you the flexibility that you're not getting or you're having concerns about at the moment. It just feels as though there probably will be a flurry there, but you're right, it's going to be a case of actually momentum building, but hopefully the cases are there, and as we build it, it will take off and again address needs. And I imagine as we're looking to foster innovation in the market, the e-commerce invoicing, all of this will come along. There'll probably be other niche things that we've not even thought about, which will Request to Pay will actually address the need for.
So I guess in any ordinary times, the three things we've just gone through would constitute a lot of change at any one time.
Yeah.
However, there's also a very fundamental change in the actual underlying architecture of the payments infrastructure itself. So I think it'd be quite good. Danny, this is something you're spending a fair bit of time on and heavily involved in. I'm going to talk us through a little bit new payments architecture. What is it exactly? Well, try and simplify it down. Don't give it.
I don't know exactly what it is.
New payments architecture and so what are the implications? So what further things is it going to drive or change that we want to talk about already?
Yeah, okay. So it was mentioned by John earlier in 2016-17, a lot of work was done. It was something called the Payment Strategy Forum, which is actually driving a lot of these initiatives. Pay UK and other organisations have been told they've got to do some things to bring payments into the 21st century. It's probably important to know that UK, or at least from my short tenure in payments, I think has often been lauded as being at the forefront of stuff like this. There's a lot going on now that might leave them lagging a little bit behind. So faster payments a bit newer, I think is that 2008, something like that. The tech that's driving BACS is 40 years old or something. I don't mean the servers, I mean the way it works, the messaging formats, which
Punch card format.
yeah, which at least three of us on this stage are sad enough to know like the back of our hands. So what they're doing is they've been told to build a new payments architecture. So a lady phrased it as, why would you try and rewire a house with the lights on? So what they're doing is they're building a new one next to it, hopefully with no unintended consequences. So yeah, it's all going to use a new data format. I say new, somebody made the joke earlier that it's from 2003, but it's a lot newer than the punch card format that used to be stamped into copper tape. That's not a joke. So this new technology is going to be built. It's called the New Payments Architecture. It's largely going to use a format called ISO 20022. Said that to a room full of corporates the other day, and they said, "Why should I care what format it is?" I said, "Fair point." They were more interested in what it could let them do. So we're doing a lot of this at the moment with some of our bigger customers in Scandinavia, and actually some of them, believe it or not, are in America who still use a lot of checks. They're sending these payment messages with so much information tied along with them that for some organisations lucky enough to embrace it, the people they're paying, reconciliation is a thing of the past. So they're sending a payment for 20 grand to buy a ship's mast, for example. And along with that information, they've got an invoice reference, they've got an early payment discount applied, they've got a credit note from the previous ship's mast they bought. And that information has just been sucked into their accounting systems, and no humans are involved whatsoever in doing that. So the example was given before on British Gas. So if one of their customers fails a direct debit twice in a year, they go from being a profit-making customer to a loss-making customer. That's how fine some businesses have their margins in. So the moment you've got to send them a letter or give them a call or threaten that you're going to cut off their gas, they go to being a loss-making customer, which is quite why we like the idea of request to pay. What this new payments architecture will deliver for businesses certainly is the ability to pay and get paid in a much more automated fashion that involves much less manual effort. The level of data that can be provided with some of these messages as well is actually going to address some different detriments that the government and financial institutions have experienced recently around knowing who's paying who and why, and who owns a bank account and why they're paying that bank account, reducing fraud, lots of other super exciting stuff. Personally, I'm much more selfishly interested in what the corporates can do with it, but that's what this new technology in 3, 4, 5 years, 10.
Yeah, certainly, and I think the key thing to go, I say certainly not necessarily 3, 4, 5, 10, yeah. In terms of where we are, so what the new payments architecture is, the analogy that we often use is it's effectively a little bit like a box with lights blinking away in the background that undertakes the settlement of the payment transactions. So it's dealing with, you're looking to move money from bank A to bank B, it's dealing with getting the money from bank A to bank B. But along with that, it's going to enable you to pass on a lot more information. It's going to have the ability to effectively change some of the timescales that we have. Certainly, in terms of timescales where we are at the moment, the MPA, New Payments Architecture, we're currently out for procurement. We're having to build a brand new shiny box with really, really nice flashing lights on it. And we're looking to go and get a vendor to actually provide that for us. It's currently out there at the moment where we're getting the requests in, or the interest in. We're working through that, we're moving through all the wonderful technical stages that you do in vendor management, which I'm not totally au fait with. But at the minute as we're going through that, we're actually looking to make a decision and actually start work on that, and it will be early next year. So there is a little bit of time going through, because we've got the task of building something wonderful, new and shiny, but we've got to make sure that it is robust and it's resilient and it's secure. And it meets everything that our regulators, so the Bank of England, the Payment Systems Regulator, everyone else expects of us in terms of delivering all the security that's going to be needed there. Working my way through this. In terms of what it'll actually mean in the short term for you is going to be nothing whatsoever. You're going to carry on doing what you're doing. And again, another key driver that we've got, which does get a little bit lost with all the MPA and the request to pay and confirmation of pay talk, is we're still making sure that those sort of like 8 billion payments worth £6 trillion are still being processed. We've got to make sure that direct debit and direct credit and faster payment and checks work and move the way that they currently work and move. We do not want to lose sight of the fact that there's an awful lot of money and an awful lot of reliance on our systems. We can't take our eye off the existing ball whilst we're looking at sort of like building something new. So that's why there's time involved in this, and it does that. But it is a case of there won't be any immediate change. When it does come to any sort of changes that are going to be there, so we've got the messaging standard has been mandated. It definitely feels the right way forward to enhance data. We will be looking to consult, we will be looking to understand. We are aware, as I think everybody is in anything you've done, you don't want to fall foul of the law of unintended consequences, we don't want to miss a trick, and we don't want to inadvertently introduce detriments where there aren't any at the moment. We do want to look to fix detriments where there may be some of the existing system. I think the 18 characters in standard 18 has probably been widely referenced as one of those, but we don't want to lose the core reliability of direct debit as being an incredibly efficient way to collect, and very, very easy way to reconcile, and a really, really good way of knowing what's going on with your customers. We don't want to lose the immediacy and it's coming up to now the ubiquity of faster payments as a way of actually settling your immediate financial needs.
So I guess if you're a corporate and you're dealing with certainly payments across Europe, maybe payments worldwide, then one of the standards you may well be using with your banks is ISO 22 or 2022 already. 2022, sorry, apologies. So you may already have made the changes to your SAP systems or your payroll systems to actually handle those formats, and you've just been waiting for the last 5 years. Given it's being used in SEPA, you may have just been waiting for the last 5 years or so for the UK to finally catch up and join the rest of Europe, just as we're leaving it. Wouldn't it be nice if we had one single payment file format? And that's not quite been the case in Europe, but hopefully, with Pay at UK and with the new payments architecture, one flavour of ISO 20022 would be very good if we adopted it all the way across the banking system. That will make things a lot easier. It would at least make it clear where we put the additional data, whether that's money laundering data, customer due diligence data, information on strong customer authentication in PSD2, how it was authenticated, that sort of information, that can be put into 20022. It would be really good if we did.
We always say time flies when you're having fun, and amazingly, time has flown. So we're pretty much out of time actually. So I mean, is there any questions? Any last questions before we ask?
Darren, a little background on the limit increase for fast payments.
That feels like that's something you picked up from the meeting we had earlier. Faster payments.
And effectively, the differentiation between CHAPS, RTGS, and fast payments, which is for the.
Yeah, I've got to. You have really caught me on my not specialist subjects, which is why I was giving that update. But yeah, so there's still work going on in terms of looking to increase the faster payment limit from where it currently sits. Due to a variety of reasons, one of which was a now resolved and understood operational issue, it sort of got put on the back burner, but they're looking to pick up and engage with that again. So there is.
But also the concept, what we're from a corporate point of view, from a retail consumer point of view, the objective of that change, to look to you have faster payments as the retail.
Yeah, it would be, and you're right. It's and the bit I didn't pick up on. Thanks for prompting me on that. Is that effectively CHAPS? The aim, I think, with the Bank of England CHAPS is that's going to become the wholesale payment mechanism. What they would like to do is see the retail payments come out of that. Obviously, with a lower limit as we currently have with faster payments, that is a bit of a barrier on some of the payments that organisations want to make. So the increase is looking to effectively bring us up in line. We will be looking to work with and align with the RTGS. Strategy of
renewal RTGS
yeah.
renewal program.
That's probably a better word than strategy, but yeah.
It is.
So look to bring time that, yeah. And again, the idea will be to offer that ability to send a much larger value faster payment. Again, what I would say is from a corporate perspective, I can't promise that everybody's going to be able to do that. There are going to be elements that your payment service provider may, or limits they may put around that. It's going to be their risk, their only money laundering, their other appetite, but it should hopefully see an increase.
So it's an interesting change in emphasis and approach for a lot of corporates.
Yeah, no, I think it's part of again Pay.UK with being or our remit or our certain statements to become the legal authority on UK retail payments. It would seem a bit odd to be undertaking that without actually being able to process a large number of UK retail payments because of the value, because the limits have been in place and the reliance has been as actually that should be going through CHAPS, but the underlying thinking on that, as I said with Bank of England, has actually changed. That's going to be the wholesale market. For the retail side, we will be looking to, with faster payments, and that will feed through into the MPA, look to deliver those increases to actually support the UK retail market, and that's the corporates as well. Far better in that regard.
And so just for those in the audience who haven't heard the sort of proposed size of those single payments, increases to faster payments, last time I spoke to somebody in faster payments, which was about 18 months ago, before the proposal went to the Bank of England, They were suggesting increasing it from £250,000 single payment limits to somewhere in the region of 10 million. Now, £250,000 won't buy you a house in London. 10 million will buy you quite a few of the houses in London, but not every house in London. So it's one of those things where somebody needs to take a decision, and I guess it's the Bank of England at the end of the day, fitting in with the RTGS renewal programme.
Let's have a look at that. So we do the faster payments stuff as well, and it's quite interesting because for years I've been hearing everyone wants faster payments, and I don't mean that with a capital F. People are saying everyone wants more immediacy, instant confirmation of credit, instant confirmation of debit, and I'm sorry to say, a lot of them don't care. Look, I get it in FX, in financial services, in anything related to the immediacy of the payment, fine, okay, I get it. A lot of corporates we speak to, they go, look, I approve my invoices once a week on a Tuesday, that means John gets the backs file, that means Janine approves the backs file, and everyone's happy. We are imagining a world which it'll take us a while to get there, but that process just died, actually. Payments become invisible. I've said it before, but the first time I got an Uber, my mind was blown. I was asking the guy if he wanted my card, and he said, no. Payments are now invisible. So that's where we want to get to. Again, I think a lot of the companies don't care if it's a faster payment. If they can send some money, and the person receiving it knows they've got it, and the person sending it knows it's gone, they're happy. And the banks are going to make their money, and we will make a bit of money as well. But I think it's really interesting. I think for those that need to send high-value quick payments, I absolutely get it. They can save some money. They won't have to do a load of these manual chaps payments that cost them 20 quid. Actually, a lot of people want to get rid of the problem of approving and sending payments. That's the kind of the problem we see. So that's our view of life for probably 3 to 5 years in the future, if I can say that bit.
Darren, Danny, I agree with that, and I believe that corporates need to move to a concept of where, when do they want the payment to arrive? They need to move away from this idea of they should never have been asked to decide, is it chaps, is it backs, is it fast payments? They should just simply be saying, I want my payment to arrive on this day. Possibly in the future with new payment architecture, even at this time. But the idea of corporate saying, I want to make a chaps payment, instructing the bank to make a chaps payment, I think is something that should be consigned to the past with new payment architecture. The idea of a customer dictating the channel is detrimental to the customer because they can end up overpaying for the service.
No, I completely agree, and I think that's why the point on e-invoicing was well made. Somebody should click a button to approve an invoice and know it's going to go on the day that you either agreed with them in the click of a button or the day when they've requested it.
But, I mean, if I may add, the thing that needs to change is accounting software.
Yeah,
So
100%.
it's not, no one's discussing how you catch it.
No, I
You can
think
send it, who's going to catch it?
I think that's a fair point, but we go on a lot to our customers around segregating duties here and controlling data there and encrypting data here, and you can do all that, right? But if your business is selling ships masts, you're going to focus on making, producing and delivering ships masts. Quite often the accounting processes are forgotten. The thing we hear all the time is, yeah, but we've always done it that way. So, well, yeah, you don't actually have to.
But then Sage could sell an extra 100 quid worth of software, and maybe they'll do some work.
They can buy it off us if they want.
Actually,
It's a specific example.
and Sage,
Others available.
Sage can certify with high street banks
Exactly.
about making a chaps payment.
Exactly.
And the high street bank is going to make a lot of money because Sage can certify that it's going to go like chaps. That's anti-competitive, if I think.
Well, they could also certify them that way.
What an argument.
And SAP and Oracle.
Coots.
This sounds like
Free agent.
a discussion to be had over some wine and so what I'd like to do is just 3 things to wrap up. So firstly, if you notice on your seats there's some kind of survey, a survey in fact, that's what it is, with a pen. And if you could give us some feedback, that would be much appreciated in terms of what have you found useful, what questions would you like to ask, or things you would like us to cover, that would be much appreciated. Second thing is that We have some food and drinks and refreshments, so please do take advantage, network, ask questions, put the world to rights. It's all good. And the third thing is I'd like to say a massive thank you to our 3 panellists who've just been brilliant and it's been very insightful. We show our appreciation, that would be great. The bar's open.